Mm. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of California Underground. We're very lucky tonight to have the Mayor of Coronado, Richard Bailey, joining us right before 4th of July weekend. I know it's a very busy weekend over in Coronado. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you for coming on and taking the time before this very busy weekend to talk about local politics. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, doing great, Phil. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great. And as always, my trusty co-host Cynthia is here as well. I know she's got plenty of questions about local politics as well. She's been looking forward to this one. Now, for people in San Diego, I would say you're pretty well known. You're like a local political celebrity. But for people who are not San Diego people, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are, how you got into politics? Just basically your life story so that people know who you are.
Yeah, in about 90 minutes or so, wrap it up then.
Yeah, about
Perfect.
that, Joe
Okay,
Rogan style.
You got it. Born and raised here in San Diego County, and always had a fascination with public policy and politics, probably beginning in high school. Went away to college and ended up majoring in business finance and started my career in the corporate finance world. But I kind of always had that natural inclination and fascination with politics. It'd be the first thing I checked in the morning when I woke up, and the last thing I'd want to read before going to bed. And so fast forward to 2012, I'd volunteered on a lot of campaigns in my free time. I was working in corporate finance then, but a lot of my free time was spent going to different political functions. And it was in June of 2012, I was driving home one day, driving across the bridge, heading back home to Coronado, and it just kind of hit me that, gosh, I'd really like to have more of a say in what goes on in local politics than simply casting a ballot for my representatives every 2 to 4 years. And so I kind of thought, gosh, like why not run for local city council in Coronado? And I was very fortunate that at the time I had a great work environment that gave me the flexibility to pursue this kind of career in public policy, and won that first city council seat back in 2012. Ended up running for mayor in 2016, and then just got reelected in November of 2020. So I've been at it for a while now.
Awesome. So now you've been mayor for a while now. That doesn't just mean you're just mayor of Coronado. One reason you wanted to hop on here and chat tonight was specifically about local politics at this local level. And if anybody follows the show, they know I always talk about how important local politics are, how they have such an impact on your daily life. And we're going to get into some things that are affecting people's daily lives here in San Diego. One thing you're a part of that you've really educated me on is this organization called SANDAG. And I didn't even know what SANDAG was. It sounded like this big, mysterious world government entity, at least on a San Diego County level. Why don't you explain what SANDAG is in the context of San Diego?
Absolutely. To be honest, Phil, I think a lot of local elected officials that aren't on SANDAG might have a hard time describing what SANDAG actually is and does. So you're certainly not alone, and viewers and listeners wouldn't be alone and not understand what SANDAG is all about either. But it is arguably one of the most important government bureaucracies that our region has. So all throughout the nation and all throughout the state of California, there are organizations that are referred to as MPOs, meaning Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And the federal government and the state government rely on these MPOs to distribute state and federal funding. In SANDAG's case, SANDAG is the MPO for the San Diego County region, and it is primarily responsible for doling out dollars for large transportation projects within San Diego County. Its budget is about $1.3 billion per year. Some of those funds come from the federal government, some of those funds come from the state, and other funds are raised locally through various sales tax. The board of Sandag is comprised of a representative from all of the 18 cities within San Diego County and a representative from the county as well. So that's kind of the overall structure of what Sandag looks like.
So the general goal is in a big county like San Diego, is to kind of get everyone to work together. Is that sort of the correct idea? Is that like the idealistic way to put it, that they want these local governments to work together?
Less about wanting the local governments to work together and more about that Sandag is a vehicle that can help implement transportation and housing policies within San Diego County. And because the board is comprised of representatives from all the local governments, ideally you would hope that they would work together. That oftentimes is not the case, especially lately. But ideally, that's what would happen. They would work together to solve transportation and housing related issues.
And one of those issues that has been most controversial recently is this idea that they were floating, which was they wanted to create a mileage tax as part of the regional plan for transportation here in San Diego County. Talk about that a little bit and how that got started and what happened to it now, and is there a future for that type of plan in Sandag?
Definitely. Well, so the bad news is that the mileage tax is almost certainly going to be something that San Diego County voters face at some point in the future, both from San Diego County and also from the state of California. But backing up for a second, kind of explaining how this came to be. Every 5 years, roughly, Sandag is obligated by state and federal law to develop what is known as a regional transportation plan. And that regional transportation plan is a 30-year forward-looking document that kind of help guides the organization and starts outlining what projects and what initiatives Sandag wants to take on to move the county forward in terms of transportation policy. Sandag goes ahead and they put an estimated figure around all the major transportation projects they want to do for the next 30 years. And then they have to come up with a reasonably anticipated funding source for these projects. The reason that's important, having these reasonable and anticipated funding sources is important, is because oftentimes funding from the state and funding from the federal government is contingent on having some amount of local funding available for those projects. For example, the Mid-Coast Trolley line that just opened up a few months ago, that was a $2.2 billion project. Sandag brought roughly $1 billion from local funds generated through local sales tax to that project, and then the federal government chipped in $1 billion as well. But if Sandag had not had that $1 billion of local funding available, the federal government would not have matched it themselves. So, regional transportation plan, 30-year forward-looking document. They identify all the projects they want in there. They estimate the cost roughly, and then they go ahead and start identifying anticipated funding sources. In this case, for the regional transportation plan, it's a $160 billion plan. The Sandag board and Sandag staff had identified 3 new sales tax increases to help fund this plan, happening in 2022, 2024, and 2028. They also identified including new tolls on basically every single freeway in San Diego County. So they wanted to charge you for driving on the highways in addition to the gas tax you're paying now. And they wanted to add on a surcharge to every single Uber and Lyft ride someone would take. And then lastly, and most controversially, they anticipated receiving a large sum of funds from what is known as a vehicle mile travel tax, or the short form, the mileage tax, which would charge drivers anywhere from 2 to 4 cents locally for every mile they drove. And they would take all those funds and then use that to build out the regional transportation plan for the next 30 years.
So was there ever any discussion? I know you and I have talked about this, but was there any discussion about how they thought they were going to tax you per mile outside of I guess the most unintrusive way is they'd ask you to report your odometer year over year, on maybe a tax form or something like that. Or, I mean, I don't know. And anything
Yeah.
more intrusive than that, I would imagine, could be a Fourth Amendment violation that they're going to start tracking your cars. Was there ever any discussion of how they actually thought they were going to get this accomplished?
There was zero discussion about how this would actually be administered. Let me rephrase that. There was a lot of discussion about how this would be administered, but there was zero clarity on what the end result would actually look like. So you raised the question about privacy concerns. A lot of board members expressed privacy concerns as well, but because the staff is completely unaware of how this will actually be implemented, because frankly the technology, although it does exist, it's never been implemented like anywhere in California or the country for that matter yet. They weren't quite sure how to answer those privacy concerns. The state of California and the federal government are moving forward with pilot programs to evaluate various ways that a mileage tax could be implemented, but so far they have not rolled those out in a mass way. It is anticipated that somewhere between 2028 and 2032 is when we will start seeing a mileage tax at the state level, and then almost certainly thereafter at the regional level.
I mean, I guess the question anybody listening and hearing this idea of a mileage tax, the first question that probably comes to mind is, isn't that the point of what the gas tax was for?
Right.
Wasn't this the whole point that they promised, oh, if we just add this tiny bit of tax on your gas, then it'll just be a consumption tax. Obviously, if you drive more, you'll pay more in tax, and that will fix all the roads and transportation here in California.
Right.
Um, and now they're saying on top of the gas tax, let's try out how many miles you drive. Does that seem like a right concern for a lot of people listening?
And that is a very valid concern, and that was a concern I raised as a board member. And Sandak staff seemed to kind of get caught up in this, where they would tell the board, "Oh well, we would never incorporate a local mileage tax so long as the gas tax remained in effect." However, when you look at the regional transportation plan's funding, you saw significant overlap between revenue coming from the gas tax during the same years that revenue was anticipated to come from the mileage tax. So just from the revenue projections in Sandag's own plan, they showed that no, they weren't planning to have the gas tax repealed before implementing the mileage tax. They were going to implement both at the same time. So that was a big concern of mine, because I think, like, most conservatives, most libertarians, most people that are center right, and I would argue probably even most Democrats, um, all believe in paying, your fair share. We might have different ideas of what paying your fair share is, but I'm a big believer in, we should pay for the infrastructure you use. And if I drive 1,000 miles on the streets in an all electric vehicle, and I effectively don't pay anything for the infrastructure I use, well, that's not necessarily fair to the person that, say, drove a truck that gets 20 miles a gallon, who's paying quite a bit in gas tax for that infrastructure. So I think we can all agree that we should pay for the infrastructure we use. I think the question is, how do you do it in the most efficient and fair way possible? And I think that when you look at that regional transportation plan, charging a mileage tax on top of a gas tax, on top of new toll fees, on top of Uber and Lyft surcharges, on top of 3 additional sales taxes, all to pay for essentially the $160 billion plan, when only roughly a third of that funding is going to go to roads and highways.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is not fair at all.
And you had made the point, because a lot of this had to do with, they want to expand public transportation.
Right.
One of their big goals is, we want to expand public transportation across the county. We want to add more buses. They've added a new trolley line. But you did a piece, I remember I caught it on KUSI, where you started in Coronado and were trying to get to La Jolla, all by public transportation. And how
Right.
long did it take you?
Yeah. We started at City Hall in Coronado, and I wanted to try out the new Blue Line, the new Mid-Coast Trolley Line extension. There was that $2.2 billion project I cited earlier. We left around 7 a.m., and it took an hour and 40 minutes, I believe, either an hour and 26 or an hour and 40 minutes on public transit. And we mapped out how long it would take by car if we left at the exact same time, and it would have taken about 26 minutes. And that, here it is, this brand new $2.2 billion trolley extension that both Sandag and MTS are hailing as the future of transportation in San Diego, and yet it takes so long to get to your final destination, and your final destination has to be within walking distance of wherever that transit's dropping you off for you to even use it, that you are so limited in your destinations that you can go to, that it just, my point was to try to demonstrate like how unrealistic this is for the average person. And I think that segment kind of drove home that point, and we're going to be doing a lot more of those leading up to November.
And I remember one of the replies was, I forget which politician, he was either Gloria or somebody like that, replied to your this video and said, well, this just proves that we need to invest more in public transportation.
It was actually MTS. I think it was MTS.
Oh, okay. It was MTS who said, this just proves our point that you need to invest more into public transportation. Right. But it's one of those things where I feel like I don't think more is never enough when it comes to public transportation and a lot of the goals of these politicians.
It is a bottomless pit. A couple of points that some of the viewers might be interested in. There's this narrative out there, especially amongst some of the left of center board members on Sandag, that we can't, quote, keep expanding freeways. And we can't keep doing what we have been doing in terms of transportation funding. We need to give even more to transit. And it's based on this premise that we just haven't been spending enough on public transit over the past 24 years. But the fact of the matter is we have spent 55% of all local transportation funding dollars on public transit over the last 24 years. And yet transit ridership as a share of overall commuters is down. It's less than 2% now. And it was at a peak around 3% before COVID, but it's down to less than 2%. And that trend was happening even before the pandemic. So it just kind of begs the question, like, if you build it, will they come? And the answer is no. The answer is no, they do not come and ride transit. And there's a number of reasons for that, including San Diego County it's a very large geographic region. And one thing, one of the many things I think is hard for Sandag board members to keep in mind is that when you go visit, New York City, or you go visit Paris, and you see this transit system they have there, and they come back and they say, gosh, we should be able to have a transit system like that here in San Diego County. Well, the fact of the matter is the Manhattan borough of New York, which holds 1.5 million people, could fit entirely within the city limits of Encinitas, which has, I think, a population of like 50 or 60,000 people. So you would have to increase the population density of Encinitas 30-fold to basically have a population density that could justify the type of transit system that they have in Manhattan. The entire city limits of Paris could fit inside the city limits of Carlsbad. And so you'd have to increase this population density of Carlsbad by 20-fold to have what it would take to have that similar type of transit system, which gets to the question I think of, well, are we here to serve the transit system, or is the transit system here to serve us? And I think too often Sandag board members and my friends on the other side of the aisle kind of get that exactly reversed. They look at us as here to serve a transit system versus a transit system serving us.
So speaking about, friends across the aisle, you're in politics, and then Phil and I, we follow politics a lot too. So we're well aware of the breakdown of.
We're
well aware. Yeah, we're well aware.
I casually follow politics. Yeah.
Yeah, we're well aware of the breakdown of so by nature, Sandag is technically nonpartisan. The municipality elections, they're technically bipartisan, but Sandag, just off the gist of it, doesn't seem like it. For the viewers, I think they'd be curious about if at the top of your head, or maybe just a rough estimate, like how partisan is Sandag? Like how many people are Democrats, how many are Republicans? Because in my opinion, I don't think it's no surprise that there is, a part of the Sandag, the people that make up Sandag, they lean a certain way in regards to the mileage tax. And then there's some people who oppose it. I know for the San Diego Republican Party, for the people we're endorsing, like for the Lincoln Club, we were looking if they were going to oppose whatever Sandag was doing. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, great question. All of the representatives to Sandag are technically elected through nonpartisan races, right? So like me being the mayor of Coronado, although I have my party affiliation, when I'm up for the ballot, it's not like you see an R or a D next to your name. So all of the Sandag representatives come from nonpartisan offices. However, there is very much a partisan bent to Sandag. So of the 19 board members, right now we have 10 that are left of center, and we have 8 that are right of center. And then the city of Escondido actually does not have a representative at this time. They actually pulled their representative, and they don't have any representation at Sandag at this time. So it's roughly a 10-8 or 11-8 left of center majority on Sandag. Now, prior to 2018, Sandag had a really interesting voting procedure. So you had the 19 board members, right? 19 board members representing their 18 cities and then also the county. And in order to pass anything at Sandag, you had to have an affirmative vote from a majority of the individual board members. So essentially a tally vote. So you had an affirmative vote from majority of the Sandag board members. But in addition to that tally vote, to pass anything, you also had to have a vote from enough cities that a majority of the San Diego County population was represented. So you had to have a majority tally vote, and you had to have a majority vote from the cities representing the majority of the population in San Diego County. Effectively, you could think of it as the U.S. House representing that population vote, and the U.S. Senate representing the interests of those individual jurisdictions. And that voting method, like, really forced collaboration, right? You couldn't have the bigger cities just say, hey, we're going to take a bunch of tax revenue from all the smaller cities that are paying into this and use it for how we want to use it. And you couldn't have a lot of smaller cities that would try to make their priorities for their smaller cities higher than what the big cities wanted. So everyone was forced to work together in a very collaborative way. So little cities could essentially block anything, and big cities could also block anything if they wanted to. But now but after 2018, the voting procedures changed. This is commonly referred to in the news as the, quote, weighted vote. Lorena Gonzalez introduced a bill that got rid of that population and individual city voting, and they go now just strictly with population. So you can have a situation where 15 board members feel a certain way and they vote a certain way, and they get overridden by 4 board members. Not just not just a veto, but cramming anything through. So what we've seen happen is we've seen votes happen where the city of San Diego, the city of Encinitas, Chula Vista, and National City all get together and they vote in a way that is at complete odds with the other 15 board members, and it passes anyways. So to your point, Cynthia, there's a lot of talk of how the Sandag board skews now, and it does skew pretty far left because it can be entirely driven by just those 4 cities.
And that's one reason why I was talking on the podcast pre-show about how important local politics is, and people don't really pay attention to these races, is getting people like yourself into local politics does have that kind of bubble up effect of like, there are going to be more people. And you've talked about it as well, where we have to keep like Rebecca Jones up in San Marcos. We have to make sure she's reelected so that we keep that seat in Sandag. And it's very important about the balance of power. It's not just that local jurisdiction, it's the voice that you and representation you now have on Sandag, correct?
Exactly. That's really what it's all about. And yeah, so if you are, say you're in the city of, and if you're in the city of Santee, you might have nothing in common with someone that lives in Encinitas, but I guarantee you're both commuting to and from work and to and from dropping off kids from soccer practice, to and from the grocery store, to and from all these different life events you might have. and you're going to want sound transportation policy. So you now, being from Santee, you should care who the representative is from Encinitas, because that representative from Encinitas is going to serve on the Sandag board and is going to be casting votes that directly affect how you move about throughout the county.
So recently there was a little bit of a scandal with Sandag. I think it was the head of Sandag, what do you call him, the president or the chairman, was found to be spending lavishly on steak dinners and all this stuff, and it was improper use of funds. Um, do you want to comment on that and what happened with all that? If we're talking about all this money that Sandag wants to raise for itself through all these new taxes, we should know if they're spending it improperly, correct?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes, they spent some taxpayer dollars improperly. There's no question about it. A few months ago, it was discovered that Sandag leadership, specifically Hassan Akrada, who's the CEO of the organization, was using the Sandag credit card to rack up some pretty sizable dinner bills with some pretty high-profile politicians, such as Lorena Gonzalez and Nathan Fletcher. I think it was a $300 meal at a nice steakhouse here in town.
Not bad.
Not bad. Even though neither Nathan or Lorena are actually on Sandag, so that was kind of interesting that he'd be taking them out to dinner. Several other large expenditures which caught the public's attention, but I think really what spoke volumes to me is that there were credit card receipts showing that Hassan had actually put his coffee on the taxpayer dime. And like, is that really, are you really expecting the taxpayers to pick up your $7 cup of coffee at Starbucks? Like, I know it seems so small and so petty, but I think it really speaks volumes to how some at the Sandag offices actually think of taxpayers.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's especially in times like these where you're getting squeezed at the pump, you're getting squeezed at the grocery store. And it just seems like there's a never-ending parade of taxes, new ideas for taxes in California. And then you're supposed to be, idealistically, you're supposed to be paying this money to Sandag to help pay your fair share to pay for infrastructure and all this. And then you have the CEO who's whining and dining politicians. And it's funny. It just seems like those two names, Nathan Fletcher and Lorena Gonzalez, seem to come up in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
They always seem to have their noses in every kind of San Diego kind of business. They have a large influence here.
Very, very powerful figures. They really are. Obviously, Lorena Gonzalez, former assemblywoman, and now she was a powerful union leader, and then she went to the assembly, and now she's an even more powerful labor union leader. And Nathan Fletcher, of course, chairman of the board of supervisors and also chair of MTS. So, yeah, they make a lot of policies, that's for sure.
So how much of this, and I wanted to go back to real quick, and then we can kind of transition, bringing up Nathan Fletcher to county supervisors. How much of this money gets raised in the billions and billions of dollars that then gets funneled back to unions who then complete the construction projects and the transportation projects, who then take the money that we've given them, and then they take that money and funnel it back to Democrats like Lorena Gonzalez, Nathan Fletcher, and all them who support unions because they say they support worker rights, but
yeah, it would be tough to put a dollar figure on it, but I offer this up for the listeners and viewers out there, and this is something that I was not as widely reported as it should have been. This to me was extremely underhanded, and in my opinion, I think it appears, and I'm darn near certain that Sandag, whether they intentionally did this or not, was effectively circumventing election law, or attempting to circumvent election law recently. So I'll get to that in a second. So backing up to fall of last year, fall of 2021, labor unions come to Sandag and they say, hey, we want a project labor agreement, meaning that all future Sandag projects will have to be built with labor union work at a certain rate. Well, the labor unions backed a lot of the candidates that are now on the Sandag board. And so guess what? Sandag board went ahead and in a split vote approved those project labor agreements. Project labor agreements tend to add anywhere from 10 to 25% to the total project costs, right? Because now you're pulling from a much smaller pool of potential laborers and contractors, and you're only now going with labor union guys. So the costs get added pretty significantly to these projects. So labor unions back candidates. Those candidates for office then get on the Sandag board, and those Sandag board members then vote to approve these project labor agreements, which benefit labor unions. Okay. Fast forward a few months later, December of 2021, Sandag board approves the regional transportation plan, which includes $160 billion in new projects. Well, guess who wants to see the funding passed to actually go out and build those projects? The labor unions, right? Because they have a lot on the line now. So what happens is Sandag has a choice where Sandag can, to put that first sales tax measure on the ballot, which they anticipated being on the ballot in 2022, the Sandag board can, with a simple up-down vote, put that sales tax measure on the ballot in November for voters. However, if they do that, it takes a 2/3 voter threshold to pass because it was initiated by Sandag. But if the labor unions put that measure on the ballot through a citizens initiative, it only takes a 50% voter threshold to pass. Now, here's the kicker. Sandag, as an agency, neither Sandag as an agency nor the board members on Sandag are allowed to coordinate with any citizens initiative. It's illegal. It's again against election law. So what Sandag said, effectively, is, hey, you know this funding for this extremely important $160 billion regional transportation plan, you know the sales tax measure that we said, yep, we reasonably anticipate coming to fruition in 2022? Well, we are not going to put it on the ballot ourselves. We are just going to hope that a citizens initiative comes through and puts it on the ballot for us. And guess what? Labor unions started to do that. So Sandag waited on the sidelines, not lifting a finger to put their own measure on the ballot. And as of, I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, the labor unions trying to put this measure on the ballot, they had to collect 100 and something thousand signatures to qualify the measure. They fell short of the number of signatures they needed. And so now that measure is not going to appear on the ballot. So now Sandag is out of a huge funding source that they were anticipating. And this is going to force Sandag into a corner that might require them to actually build or develop a new regional transportation plan. So I look at this and just thought, man, this is poetic justice. Here you had Sandag trying to circumvent election law by getting in bed with the labor unions, and the labor unions dropped the ball. So great. That's what they get. That's what they deserve.
Yeah, it's definitely an unholy alliance, it seems like, between the two of them, and it's just a vicious cycle of money in, money out. And I mean, you can follow the money with all of this. I mean, it's easy to follow who donates to which candidate, and most of them are unions, and then the union money backs Democrats pretty much 100% here in California.
No question.
It's just they raise a lot of money, and then you have people like Lorraine Gonzalez who create laws like AB 5 that then goes back to help the unions, and who I think she blocked me, actually. So I'm proud of that she blocked me.
She blocked me too on both her personal and her assembly account.
It's a right of
she blocked me.
Yeah. Honor.
I think I called her out too many times for, how does she like her new cushy labor union job? And then that was it. She blocked me. So she didn't like that too much. For someone who acts like she's very tough and that she can take it, she likes to block as soon as possible.
I've noticed a lot of politicians tend to have some pretty thin skin.
That's very true. And speaking of people with thin skin, Nathan Fletcher, who you brought up, who is the current chair of the county supervisors. And again, this is, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but again, this is why local politics matters, is the board essentially flipped from, even though it's nonpartisan, it is a nonpartisan race, but everyone sort of knows who's running. It did flip in the last election. It went from Kristen Gaspar, who was a Republican, it was a 3-2 Republican county supervisor board, to right around COVID. Now all of a sudden we had Lawson Remmer, who jumped in, who is a Democrat, far lefter Democrat. And because of that 3-2 majority, now you have Nathan Fletcher, who is the chair of the county supervisors.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And really, when you rewind the clock, just I think maybe 6 years. No, 4 years now. The board was a 5-0 Republican Democrat majority. So there were no Democrats on the board, and within a short order, now it's a 3-2 Democratic Republican majority, and you've seen some drastic policy changes, right? Like you've seen the county's trying to take on everything now, from trying to cure racism. I don't know how a government agency is going to do that, to trying to redefine what a woman is. I'm not sure we needed a new definition there. It's like, hey, like guys, we have got to get back to the basics of what local government is all about. We can't be all things to all people. We're oftentimes not good enough at even what our core responsibilities are. So I think we really got to get back to focusing on the basics.
And one thing that, and maybe this is just my tinfoil hat, is it feels like ever since Nathan Fletcher has become the chair, it seems like San Diego has become the testing ground for some of these national policies that are being run out. So it was back last year in August, they rolled out this resolution of we're going to start pushing back, or it was very wishy-washy and mushy how they were going to do it, that they want to start going after misinformation. And in Nathan Fletcher's words, he wanted to combat and use county resources to combat what was called misinformation.
Right.
We then saw the Ministry of Truth, or excuse me, the Disinformation Governance Board will be rolled out at the federal level. So it feels like ever since then, we've been seeing a lot of those leftist policies being tried out here in San Diego County.
Look, I'll give Nathan Fletcher a lot of credit. Nathan and I are, we do work together from time to time. We are on very opposite sides of just about every single issue you can find. But I'll give Nathan credit for this. Like he is effective at advancing the policies for the left of center of San Diego County, like the far left of center. Like he's been effective at that, and I think that's to the detriment of our county. I think that oftentimes has not benefited everyday San Diegans, but he has been effective at advancing those far left policies. There's no question about it.
And
Cynthia, I didn't want to step on you. You had a question. Go ahead.
Oh, so, and fun fact too, like you brought up, combating misinformation. I remember when he did that, he bragged on Twitter that other county supervisors followed suit, and he bragged about that. And then I also remember during the last session for the state assembly, Dr. Akila Weber, she also introduced a similar resolution. I can't recall if it garnered the votes or if it made it out of the assembly and it just kind of died because the appropriations just of timing. So I remember that. A question that I had is also, I'll be honest, like talking about this, maybe some viewers or listeners, if they're right of center, like they might think that there's no hope. Do you think there's hope? Like, for example, like one thing that we try to emphasize is following along what's happening locally. And I know one thing that I give you credit for, because you did lead the effort on this when there was a mileage tax proposed, you were encouraging everyone as constituents to call your elected officials who are board members of Sandag, email and call these people, let them know that you're opposed to this. Do you think those kinds of things make a difference, even to those members of Sandag that for a fact are on your side? Because I have also heard, like, hey, even if if you think that their votes are dependent on it, like they could be swayed. And then I've also heard the other side of advice, even if that, like, for example, like I know if you were my representative, like I know you'd vote how I would want to vote, but I've also heard like it's important you still let them know that you support this too, because for example, I would imagine if you were on a board meeting for Sandag and you have like a data sheet, like, oh, hey, this amount of people called me, that agree with me on this. Like, do those things matter? Do you think it makes a difference when constituents, make their voices known?
Yeah, no question about it. It definitely matters. I'll give you a quick example. Leading into the adoption of the regional transportation plan, which included that mileage tax, we had only received, I want to say, somewhere between 200 and 500 public comments on the regional transportation plan, with about 72, with about 3 to 5 days left before we're going to approve the plan, all from special interest groups that had a lot to gain by us advancing this plan, whether environmental groups or local labor unions. However, as we started spreading the word that, hey, regular folks in San Diego County, here's what's in the plan. You got, if this plan passes, you are going to be on the hook for all these sales tax increases, this mileage tax, etc. Contact your representative. And we made it very easy for them to contact all board members, but specifically easy to contact their board member. So if you were writing in from Encinitas, you could write to all the Sandag board members very easily, but you could also write to Catherine Blakespear, who's a representative from Sandag representative from Encinitas. In those last 3 to 5 days, we had over 6,000 people write to the board. And so if you're from a small, now 6,000 people in a county of 3.3 million might not sound like many people, but if you are from a small city like Imperial Beach, or like, heck, even Encinitas, Solana Beach, Del Mar, Santee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, most of the cities here in San Diego County, if you see 6,000 emails come into your inbox, like it was ping, 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 every day for 3 to 5 days, that's going to make a difference. And I know it made a difference because the day before the vote on the regional transportation plan, you had every single Sandag board member, with the exception of one, say, we're going to adopt this plan tomorrow, and yes, it's going to include the mileage tax, but I'm not actually for the mileage tax anymore, and I promise to you voters, we will come back and take this mileage tax out. So they were at least willing to pay it lip service because they saw just how many people were opposed to it. So yes, I do have hope. I really do have hope for the future of San Diego County. You know what? I actually have not given up on the Democratic Party. I'm registered Republican. I think the Republican Party, we haven't done ourselves a lot of favors over the last decade or two, but I do think that the general thrust of the Republican Party of conserving government, making it smaller, bringing decision making closer to the people that decisions actually affect, and really focusing on the core responsibilities of local government are policies that resonate with the general public. Public safety, sound infrastructure, these transportation projects, making it so that people can get to and from work easier, making it so that people don't have to join a labor union just because they want to be an independent contractor. Like, these are the types of common sense policies that register with people across the political spectrum. And I think that if the Republican Party can lead on policy versus trying to lead with their party, they will appeal to a broad range of voters. And whether or not it's a Republican office or a Democrat that was kind of brought to the center because of being in a stiff competition with Republicans, I think that will overall better serve our region. So I haven't given up on our region. And I think the more we can focus on policy, the better off our region will be.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think one thing that I always gripe about the Republican Party here in California is that their major policy platform is, we're not Democrats.
Right.
And that can't be a policy. You can't
No.
be the contrarian party. The contrarian party or the contrarian candidate rarely ever wins.
Right.
You can't just be, I'm not that person, because people want to vote for something and feel like they are getting something.
Right.
And if you have a Republican Party who doesn't really propose anything outside of a lot of the old, and I'm sorry, Lord Reagan, for saying this, but strike me down if you want, but saying the old Reagan talking points of like the 80s and lower taxes and all this stuff, there's a lot of issues that are specific to California now that require different policy solutions than they did back in the 1980s.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in many ways, I think local government officials, they try to become something bigger than what local government should be, right? You have these local government figures that are trying to talk about abortion issues and gay marriage issues and foreign policy and immigration policy and all this stuff is completely outside the core responsibilities of what a local government actually does. Like, local government, we provide for the public safety through good policing. through laws that actually allow police officers to apprehend people that are committing crimes. We're supposed to focus on our roads and our bridges and our highways, and we're supposed to accomplish those first two objectives in a fiscally responsible manner. And if we could just focus on the basics, like the rest one, you end up being nothing to no one. And now, we have politicians talking about, I love it when local politicians especially talk about, we need to keep the Earth's climate from changing. It's like, these guys can't even keep people from crapping on the sidewalks of their own cities. It's like, hey, start there. Like, clean up your own backyard first before you try to keep the climate from changing. Like, let's just get back to the basics and focus on doing what's right for our constituents. And I think the voters will notice that, and they will reward those policymakers that are fulfilling those obligations.
Well, even Gavin Newsom today put out that video. I mean, that is some quick responsive video. If he put on his shirt and his hat and ran up to the burnt out forest to record that. I mean, talk about taking advantage of a political moment to talk about the Supreme Court ruling in the EPA, just to talk about amongst all those burnt out trees. This is why we have to focus in California on climate change. And it's like, or you could do stuff that's in your power, like wildfire management and forest management and water management and all these things that are actually in your control, but you don't want to talk about these because it's the bigger policy. So
and it's not, it's not sexy. It's not going to grab the headlines to say, hey, we're making an update to our forest management policy. We're making an update to our water conservation policy. Like, that doesn't sound nearly as sexy as Governor Newsom spends $54 billion to fight climate change. Well, good luck. Thanks for wasting more money.
So in kind of wrapping all of this up, because I want to kind of bring it back to Coronado, and how all of this big web of local politics interacts. We've talked about Sandag. I know you've talked about the county supervisors. And just recently, you've been sort of going back and forth with the county supervisors, specifically Dr. Wilma Wooten. They changed the testing on the water in Coronado, whether it's safe to go in the water or not, especially right before 4th of July. This is a big problem. Talk about that for a little bit.
All right, so this is rich, and it's going to be reminiscent of the various public spaces discussion on closing down the public spaces during the whole beginning of COVID, where things were being shut down that didn't make sense to shut things down. So the county of San Diego is legally responsible. They've been tasked legally by the state of California for doing water quality testing in our oceans and bays throughout San Diego County. There are 2 state-sanctioned tests that the San Diego County Department of Health, who's led by Wilma Wooten, can utilize when doing these water quality tests. Now, in Coronado, historically, our beaches get closed on occasion, usually only after when there's been a large rainstorm, or if there's been a big sewage impact in Tijuana. Either they had to shut off the sewage treatment plant in Tijuana, or there's a big malfunction, or something happened. Those are usually the only 2 reasons we ever see the beaches in Coronado closed. We have never seen the beaches in Coronado closed during the summer months. Why? Because the water quality tests that the county has done for the last, several decades show that the water is clean and is safe enough to swim in. Well, beginning May 5th of 2022, San Diego County Department of Health switched from one state-sanctioned water quality test to the other. And they are now the only county in the entire nation that utilizes this other test. From May 5th through today, Coronado beaches have been shut down 18 out of approximately 52 days. It's about a third of all the days during the summer months. Put that in perspective. We've once again never had our beaches closed at all during the summer of all previous months. So sit down with the county, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on here. I asked them, under the other testing methodology, because they're still using both tests, but they're only using the new test to determine whether or not beaches should be shut down. So they still have the testing results from the other test they're using. I asked, hey, on this other test you have been using, would the beaches be closed? Like, are we seeing any environmental changes? That any new sewage coming from Mexico, or are the environmental conditions the environmental conditions are the same as they always have been? There is no change in water quality conditions from May 4th to May 5th to June 30th. Yet those beaches were closed every single day then. And there's no change in the water quality between what we see now when beaches are closed and what we've seen every single summer for the past 20, 30 years where the beaches were open. So we had a lot of back and forth on this. I have some really steep concerns that the threshold the county is using to shut down the beaches is not appropriate and is not reflective of a sound public policy, let alone actually protecting the public's health. So we've had a lot of back and forth with the county, and the county, just as of today, decided they were going to change their protocols on testing. So they have this new test. They're still moving forward with the new test, but they've said, you know what? Instead of closing down the beaches outright, we are just going to put up warning signs when thresholds are surpassed on your beaches, beginning tomorrow. Well, tomorrow is the kickoff to the July 4th weekend. So I flat out asked them on the call, are you only making this change because of the July 4th weekend? And they said, effectively, they said, yeah. So I said, look, at the end of the day, we are only concerned with, is the water safe? So if you're telling me that the water quality is the same on July 1st when you're going to allow people to swim in the water, as it is in June 30th right now, when you're saying people can't go swim in the water, well, is the water safe today and the beaches should be open, or is the water dangerous on July 1st and the beaches should be closed? Like, one of those is true.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to answer that. And so we're battling with the county right now. And for all the viewers out there, like, I want you to know, where am I going to be spending my 4th of July weekend? Is going to be in Coronado in the water, because the water is safe. The water is just as safe this summer as it has been all previous summers. So if you've ever enjoyed swimming in our oceans in previous summers, you're going to enjoy swimming in our ocean now. I would, unless you have a gaping wound or you're drinking the water, like, you're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine.
Which you shouldn't be doing anyway. I don't think you should be going in the ocean with a gaping wound or drink. I don't drink a lot of seawater. It's not good for you.
Don't do it. I'm not a doctor, but I'll tell you this, that's not good for you. Yeah.
You ever see any of the dogs down at Coronado Dog Beach when they go a little too much on the water and they start drinking too much of it and see what happens?
Gets a little
it usually comes right back up. So
Yeah.
it's not a pretty sight. So don't do that.
Don't do that. But no, your question really kind of speaks volumes to how county policy can affect local governments. And let's put it this way, if the county does not update their testing protocol and put some new procedures in place and hopefully go back to using the other state sanctioned test, Imperial Beach will never be open again, like, ever, for several years. Imperial beaches won't be open.
Yeah.
And Coronado's beaches, we're on average, we have anywhere from maybe like a week to 2 weeks over the entire year on average where our beaches are shut down. Our beaches will end up being closed roughly 60. Once again, not wanted to implement. It was a bureaucratic decision. There we go.
And that's when. Yep.
Did I lose you for a second? Oh, perfect.
A little bit, yeah. Must be all the activity over where you're near. And this is, I guess, is a good thing to end on when it comes to local politics. And people always ask me, I post something, it's something about, Dr. Wilma Wooten or people like this, and they say, well, what can we do? What can we do? And they always immediately want to say, well, can we sue them? Can we do this? I'm like, here's the God's honest truth. You got to get out and vote. You got to change your local politics. This is, and I think the biggest lesson people should take away from this specific podcast is it's all a big web and it's all a big cycle. Who you elect as mayor of Coronado makes a difference on who is in Sandag, who could possibly be running in county of supervisors. It all comes around, and you know, it's all interconnected. So don't like just skimp over those local politicians who's running for your city council. Even if you think it doesn't really make a difference, it does make a difference, right? It does absolutely make a difference in the end.
Huge difference. If we had the balance of power on the county board right now, I know for a fact I could get the county to change their testing standards in Coronado. And let's be honest here, whether or not you can use the beach in Coronado, or whether or not you can have that pothole fixed on your street, or you can get to or from work on that new highway, like that actually affects your day-to-day life, your quality of life, a lot more than who the senator from Oklahoma is, or I mean, in many ways, who the president of the United States is. And that's not to say those races aren't important, but your day-to-day life is always going to be much more impacted by the people that represent you locally.
So my last question for you is, because I was reading this article because you did an event with San Diego Young Republicans, and there was a piece from the San Diego News Desk about it, and you had shared about when you ran for city council a little bit. Would you be able to shed a little bit light on it? Because I thought it was a very interesting read. I had read that you had won by it was a very close margin, and when you were out walking precincts, there were people that, you had, mixed bag of different experiences when you're canvassing. And I think, shout out to Brad Goebel. He texted me that he's watching the show right now, and you met him when you were canvassing. He's your right-hand man. Love to be able to kind of close on that note.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things you learn about politics is that politics just comes down to relationships, and whoever has the most relationships. And I'm so fortunate to have a great team of people. Most notably Brad Goebel, who I met early on in politics, and has become not just my right-hand man with campaigns, but also one of my best friends. And that's been a very, very rewarding experience for me. But one of my favorite stories to tell is when I was first running for office. Here I was, 26 years old in Coronado, running for city council. And Coronado's demographics, especially back 10 years ago, skewed a little more older than it does today, actually. And I went and I knocked on every single likely voter's door twice. And I credit that to helping me win. And the reason I credit that for helping me win is because oftentimes when I would knock on someone's door and I'd introduce myself, hear what they had to say, kind of make my pitch, oftentimes they would tell me, hey, look, don't get discouraged. You're a little too young. You're probably not going to win, but don't be discouraged. You're a good guy. You're a good guy. I'd shake their hand, thank them for their time. And as I would turn to walk away, oftentimes they would say, you're not going to win, but I'm still going to vote for you. I'm still going to vote for you. And that happened quite a few times. And I ended up winning that first election by just over 100 votes. And so I'll never forget that. And to this day, when I'm out and about in town and talking to people, like to this day, I'll still have people say, I remember when you knocked on my door 10 years ago. And it makes a big impact on people. And it brings it back to, it's all about relationships. And so if you have great relationships with a large number of people, you can win any election, and hopefully they'll help hold you accountable to do what's right for your community.
And 100 votes is, and when everybody says, oh, my vote doesn't matter, why even vote? I say, some of these races are decided by less than 100 votes, and they're very, very close. So every vote does actually matter in the end. So go out and do actually vote for your local politicians or local politics. Richard, thanks for coming on. We don't want to take up too much of your time heading into the 4th of July weekend. Where can people find you if they want to follow you? Do you have any plans outside of Mayor of Coronado for future politics, or are you not ready to say anything quite yet?
I was previously I was going through with a run for Congress, and just from redistricting, it didn't quite work out. I'm a big believer, and I'm hoping it'll be a blessing in disguise, and you never know what's around the corner. So I think after we'll get through this November 2022 election cycle, and I think some things will open up for the 2024 election cycle, and might be able to help continue representing Coronado on a bigger stage. So we'll see. Check back in with me next year.
Awesome. And where can people find you and follow you on social media?
Instagram and Facebook. If they search for Richard Bailey, I should pop up. And then richardbailey.com is our website, currently down because we're making some updates to it. But yeah, looking to stay connected with people out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. Have a great 4th of July weekend. Stay cool this weekend. And don't drink lots of don't drink lots of salt water.
I promise
while
you
you're
I
out
will not be. Yeah, we'll find something.
And don't go in with any open gaping wounds or whatever. So
Thank you, Richard, for joining us. We really appreciate it. I know I made a post about on Instagram, but honestly, like, I just want good human beings in politics.
Same.
I just feel like that's such a hard request. I think, like, if politicians in general were more like you, I feel like the world would be a better place. So, thank you for coming on. I was really looking forward to this. Yeah, so hopefully we can have you back on in the future soon.
We'll love that. Thank you both for having me, and thanks for spreading the word about local issues. It means a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks. And as I always end every show, if you like this, text a friend, let them know. And yeah, have a good 4th of July, everybody. Good night.
Right on. Bye, guys.
Good night.